right, well, good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock, so I want to go ahead and be respectful of your time and get started. So this is Do More with Execute FileMaker Data API. My name is Todd Weller with Cross IT. Here's some information about me while I'm working and while I'm not working. And that's all the time I have to talk about that. But I will add that despite any similarity in appearance, I've never played a doctor on television. When you say, talk to me, Goose, I stop and talk to you in the hallway. So why are we here? Maybe we would explain that before we just dive in. And the biggest thing is that the Execute FileMaker Data API script step is another tool in our toolbox. Typically, Claris and FileMaker over the years have given us multiple ways to solve a problem, but we want to make sure we're using the right tool for the job. I think they even used the adage yesterday during the keynote, if the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, every problem is going to look like a nail. And so this is not the magic bullet that is going to fix every problem, but you need to understand what it can do so that when those situations arise, you're applying the proper technique. And so that's what we want to do here. A couple of the reasons why I use it is that the result, especially where you're doing a read request, is going to come back as a formatted JSON object. A lot of the things that I'm doing, both to just pass data from as a script parameter or internally or to an external service, requires JSON. And so this is a nice, easy way to get that JSON. It's also very consistent. I'm sure we've all written things where looping through records, assembling our own JSON objects so that we can pass it off to another process. We go to another file, another solution. We do the same thing, but we do it a little bit differently. And now we've got to rethink about how I'm going to parse it back out. Well, this script step is going to return it in a very consistent format. And so that makes it easier to parse out, whether you're using the JSON functions in FileMaker, or if you have your own custom functions to parse it out, you're going to get that consistent result that you're then going to be able to use. Another reason why I like it is it's a little bit easier to set up because it is a single script step. I wrote a script using a legacy method that you'll find in the demo file that does pretty much the same thing as one of the demos we're going to look at. And it took me 40 steps after I threw out all of my comments and white space. I still had 40 steps just to assemble record data in a JSON object where I could do it with one step with this script step. And the request that you make as a parameter to the script step is a JSON object as well. There's a lot of things that you can do with this script step that you can also do with the execute SQL function. But of course, to do that, you need to know how to write a SQL statement. And we're FileMaker developers, so we don't have to know how to write SQL statements. And so if you are already working with JSON, it makes it a little bit easier. So those are some of the things as to why we're here. And then here's a few examples. We are not going to dive into the details, but just to kind of whet your appetite as to what is possible. So this is just a simple orders function, or like we've got shipping information, and oftentimes if a customer calls back, they want to repeat an order. So you have to duplicate the order, but there's things that you don't want to have duplicated because it is unique. So you can see here, we run the script and it blanks out quantities, things that are date specific, so that the user is forced to go back in and fill in that required information. And so I'm using the execute that data API script step to grab the information from the current record and then parse it through the rest of the script to create the new record. So that was kind of the first use case that I came to. And then I'll run a second example here, which is a variation of this, but instead of reading data with the script step, we're actually going to write records out. And as soon as we catch up there, we're going to open up a window there you see in the back is a table that I've dubbed script log. And so when we run the script, it's going to do the same thing, except it is going to write records to that other table. It's not connected to my orders and my line items relationship. It's in its own table of occurrence. And so we run that, and you will see the records are going to appear over there in our script log. And what that looks like is, as we jump over there, you'll see there's a column for the date and the time, the message, information, is it a warning or not? Was there an error number, file name, script name, and the line number of the script step that was executed. And where I've used this is when you're running perform script on server, or if you've got a scheduled server-side script, the error log is going to tell you if you have an error, but you don't have any visibility to see when things are successful what is going on. Or you can add this script step into those scripts, write something out to a table that is not linked to what's happening in your script, but you're still going to be able to see what is happening. And that could be something that you just leave in there, or you could, just be temporary while you're doing debugging, but it's a nice way to do that. So what are you going to get out of this session? Well, as you might expect, we're going to focus on the Execute FileMaker Data API script step, as the title of the session implies. But there's things that I'm doing in the demo file as far as assembling JSON, using the let statement, using the while function to help. We're not going to dive into any of that. So we're going to focus primarily on the script step and what its settings are and the different options that you would want to use. And it's going to be what's possible. We're not going to have time to dive into everything. And so I'm going to try to give you as much as possible. I think I've tried to scrim as much in so that the Q&A time is about a minute, just so you know. I don't want to get stumped. This session is not, however, a deep dive into the Claris FileMaker Data API. There's two different things. This is focused on the script step itself. All right, so I said we're not going to talk about it, but it's not Fight Club. We do have to still talk about it. And so what is the Claris FileMaker Data API? Well, it was officially introduced in FileMaker 17. And what that is, it was designed for accessing hosted FileMaker files through web services. Okay. And it follows the representational state architecture. So if people ask, does FileMaker have a RESTful API? We can answer yes. And so that's what Claris FileMaker Data API does. And there's four main components to the Claris FileMaker Data API. You have your endpoint URL, which is typically, the name or the IP address of the server, the file name, the script name, possibly another parameter or two in that endpoint URL. You have your HTTP method. There's a number of different methods for APIs in general. The Claris API uses post, get, patch, or delete. Same way, there's the HTTP headers that you need. Again, there's a number for APIs in general. These are just a few examples of what Claris uses, but the content type, the authorization are things that you would need to worry about there. And then there's also a parameter that is in JSON format. Yeah.
Is there a class that goes over this in this DevCon?
You know what? I apologize. I did not check to see if there was any class about the web service data API. So sorry about that. All right. So that is all the time we have for the web service. So let's go ahead and talk about the script step. The script step, it was introduced in FileMaker 19, so a couple of versions later. And part of the reason why we needed to talk about the web service is that we were using the same underlying functionality when we use the Execute FileMaker Data API script step as what the FileMaker Data API uses when you're on a host. And so the reason why that's important is a lot of the documentation that you want to refer to is actually for the Claris FileMaker Data API as far as some of your parameters and options and things of that nature. So there is help for the script step, but you'll want to go back to the web service for additional information. And at the time it was released, there were two actions that you could use, which were the read action and metadata action. And then currently, it was updated with the release of FileMaker 2024 or version 21, depending on your preference. And with that, we got create, update, delete, and duplicate actions added to our capabilities, which is part of the reason why we're talking about it today. So there are some similarities, of course. It uses a layout and that the underlying table occurrence to set the context of your action. And it returns the result in the same JSON format. So if you've already been using the Claris FileMaker Data API as a web service and getting that response back, you're going to see the same JSON structure with the script step is what you see with the web service. As far as differences go, the FileMaker file that's executing the script step does not need to be hosted. So if you are using an iPad app or a local copy of FileMaker Pro and you're not connecting back to the server, the script step is going to function. Is not making a web service call to the host at any point. So again, you don't have to worry about that connection being present. The FileMaker Data API does not need to be enabled on the host. So even though we're talking about, it's a script step that will run locally, you can still use it in a hosted file, so you don't have to worry about that. But if it's a case where you want to take advantage of the script step, but not enable the data API on your server, you don't have to enable it in order to use the script step in your files. And then lastly, the request is a simple JSON object. You don't have to worry about your endpoint URL, your method, or your headers. So we'll dive into that. Now, before we get into the script workspace, we need to just talk about the layouts because that is what's going to set your context for the script. When you're doing read actions, everything that comes back is going to be based on the fields that you placed on that layout. So you want to have an idea of what those layouts are, what they're going to be. Your API request is going to reference the layout or the table occurrence since there is no endpoint URL. So that's one of those differences that you're going to see when you're setting up your JSON script or JSON parameter for your request, is that you're going to include that information there. When you're doing a metadata request, which is going to get you information about your solution or either the layouts or the tables, you're going to use a table occurrence for a couple of those. And then everything else is going to be with either a layout or that underlying table occurrence group that the layout is based on. Okay, and this provides what I've dubbed contextless context because the layout or the table that you reference in the request does not need to be the context of the script that you're running. But all of the data API action is going to be tied to the layout or the table that you reference in your request. So whatever relationships are set up is going to still apply. It's not a lot of the stuff you can do with the script step. It's very similar to the execute SQL statement because you're getting information back to your script out of context of the script, but you're going to be tied to the context of that layout. It's not like the SQL statement where you can create a join to two tables that are not already related.
Are you able to modify the JSON object to however format you would like for the endpoint?
If I understand the question, I'm going to say yes. So we'll go through it. If we need to have a conversation afterwards, we can dig into it. So, okay, so here's just a quick demo of one of the layouts. This is for our example at the beginning. And so I have a folder set aside for my data API layouts. On the order one, we switch over to that. You see, I make sure I know what this layout is for so I don't accidentally do anything to it. Some instructions for future Todd. And then we have the billing address, the shipping address, and then I have a portal there with the information in the portal that I want to get back. And that's one thing I really like about the script step is because you can get your record data and your related record data without having to do another find or a go to related record. You can get it all if your portal's on the layout. All right. So finally, to the script step itself. So there's three options that you need to concern yourself with. First one is the request. This opens the calculation editor for you to set up your calculation to build a request that needs to be just text in JSON format. Your target is going to be either a field or it can be a variable, just like other script steps. If the variable doesn't exist, it's going to go ahead and create it for you. And then the last option with the script step itself is just the checkbox for the insert or select entire contents, which is the same behavior we see in some of like set field as to whether you're going to replace the contents or insert at the point of the cursor has focus there in your field. So we'll go on and we're going to look at some examples here now. And what I've done, just to save time so I don't have to jump back and forth between slides and demo and forget what I'm doing and hit the wrong button, I've copied and pasted the results and the requests over here so we don't have to look at script debugger and data viewer. So this is just an example of a result. And you'll notice that there are two objects inside. There is a messages object. It's going to tell you whether the action was successful or not. And then you have the response object. And that's what we're going to be focused on here because you guys aren't old enough yet for us to talk about the messages. Okay. So this is a create product request. We see that just based on the message, it was okay. And it's giving us some information there in the response. Go ahead and dig into that. Now, obviously, to get that response, we have to make a request. Now, there's a couple of keys that you'll see information about that do not apply to us, and I just wanted to call those out. One of them is a databases key in the request. Because of how we're using it in the script step, the script always uses the database that's associated with the window. So we don't have to worry about saying what database we're using. It knows we're using the database that we're in. Same thing with authorization. Because we're running a script, it's going to run with the same privileges as either the current user or full access if you have your script set up to run as full access privileges. Content type, it's always going to be JSON, so we don't have to worry about setting that. And then also, when you're using the web service, you can have it run a script as part of your request. But in this case, because we're already running a script with a script step, if you need to run another script, you just use perform script. Do it that way. All right, so those are the ones you don't have to worry about. These are the ones we want to worry about. The first one is your action, which is, again, those 6 are read, metadata, create, update, delete, or duplicate. Now, what's interesting is that this key is not required in your JSON request. Because it is going to default to a read action. So if you don't say anything, it's going to interpret your request as a read. Now, I would argue that you want to be explicit. And so that way, future you, when you come back to it, knows exactly what that request is going to do. Now, that might be my CDO a little bit. Those of you unfamiliar with that, that's like OCD, except the letters are in alphabetical order. Like there's so there's also a version key. You have your choices there are V1, V2, and V latest. This primarily, it defaults to V1. And what this does primarily is it sets the way your response is handled during a read for your portal data. So in V1, if your layout is in form view, you're going to get all of the related records in your portal. If it's in table view, it's going to return the first related record of the portal. If you use the V2 option, it's always going to behave as form view, so you'll get all of the related records as long as you don't exceed the limit. And then, of course, V latest is same as V2 at this point. And based on Clay's talk yesterday, there will not be a V3. I don't know. But so if you were there at Clay's talk, I appreciate you coming to this one. Okay. There's a layouts key, and that's where we set the layout name. What you want to notice here is that the key itself is plural, layouts, but you're specifying a single layout. Okay. There's also a tables key, and this is a table occurrence. So 2 things to note there. Again, it's plural, but you're specifying a single item or a single value. And it is the table occurrence name. It's not the actual name of the table. It's the specific table occurrence. Okay.
You need to specify both if the layout has a table.
No, it's either one or the other. Yeah. You have to have one or the other, but you would never have both at the same time. So here is the example of a request you would construct if you wanted to get a list of all of the tables that are in your solution. So here we have our action. The table's key is there, but it doesn't have a value. That's how it knows to give us information about all tables. And then for the version, I just went ahead and put the latest in there. So we execute our script step. And then this is the response portion of the object that we would get back. So we get this tables array. And then each object in the array has both the base table name as well as the name of the table occurrence. And then it just repeats until you see all of the table occurrences that are in your solution. Okay. Another variation of the metadata is this time we're using a layouts key, and we're specifying a layout. In this case, it's the API product layout. I forgot to note there at the bottom in the demo file, I put the name of the script that is going to run. So if you want to go back, look at anything in detail, you can find it easy. So if we execute that response, we see here, again, in our response object, there is a field data object, and that is also an array. And then each object in the array has specific information about each field that is going to be on that layout. You can see there's the product name, and then some information about its validation and auto enter settings. And of course, it's going to repeat as needed to give you all of the fields. There's also the portal metadata object. In this case, this layout did not have a portal, so it's empty. And then it also tells us what table occurrence this layout was based on.
If your field is off the layout, does it return that one?
I believe it does. Fortunately, I have not tested that. Again, the CDO kicks in and everything is either on the layout or it's been removed. So.
Can you just repeat the questions?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the question was if a field is off the layout, will it return the response? And I believe it does, but I've not tested it.
It does.
It does.
It returns all
long
fields,
as it's
whether
a
they're
table
on the layout or not when you're getting metadata.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay, so those are getting back to our request keys. These are ones that are going to be more focused on your read requests. Obviously, the first one is your query, which is an array of JSON objects that specify your find criteria. You can also sort the response that you get back. So we have the sort, which is a JSON object that defines your sort order for the records. There is an offset key, which is the record of the number of the first record in the range of records to return. That value defaults to 1, which makes sense. And then there's also a limit, and this is the maximum number of records to return at any one request. This value defaults to 100. So depending on the number of records you're going to get back from your request, you may need to either increase the limit, or you would do multiple Execute FileMaker Data API calls, changing the offset to get each additional chunk of records until you've got everything returned back.
Is there a hard limit?
Not that I'm aware of. I think it depends on the amount of memory. Like if you've got one field, you could probably expand that very large. But if you've got a lot of fields, the number is going to be less just because of how much you can put into a variable or field size, would be my guess. Yes. For storage. For the layout, now this one here is probably hard to see, but there is a period there. It's layout.response. And this allows you to specify a layout to return the response in the context of that layout rather than the one that you specified in the layouts key we looked at earlier. I have to be honest with you, I never found a reason to use this key because I've always made sure that if I needed a different response, I would just use that layout when I referred to it earlier. I did do a test just to see if I do a find with a summary field, if I specify the layout without the summary field and then switch to a layout that has the summary field versus just using the layout with the summary field on it, see if there was a performance difference, because sometimes when you're doing a FileMaker find, you do your find on a layout that has no fields, and then you switch to a layout that has the result, so you're not summing your entire bound set, and the difference was milliseconds. So I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason it's in there. I don't know what that reason is, so I just wanted to point that out. You can also specify which portal you want to return data from. It's going to default to all portals, so if you have a portal on your layout, it's automatically going to return those results. This would only be if you want the specific portal. Again, I'm one of those OCD people where if I needed a different result, I would create a separate layout with a specific portal on it. That is an option depending on how you want to set things up. And with those pupils, you have an offset and a limit both, which is just offset dot name of your portal and limit dot name of your portal. It behaves the same as the records as far as the first record that's returned and the number of records. The only thing of note here is that your limit is going to default to 50. So it's a different value, but it behaves the same. So let's look at some read requests. This one here is we're just searching in the product table. We want to find every product that has a description that includes the word jet. So that's what that would look like. Now, if you need to do an AND search where you're looking at multiple criteria, your query, and again, this is just the query portal, everything else would be the same. You see that it's still a single object in our array, but now we have two name value pairs inside that first object. So this would be description of jet and price less than $600. Now, if you needed to do an OR search, you would just add a second object to your array, and you could have as many as you need. And so this one here is, again, description of jet and OR price less than 400. So you would just add to your array that way. If you needed to do a sort, you would add this sort object to your request. And you'll notice, again, an array where each object in the array has the field name as well as the sort order. And the values for the sort order would be the expected ascend or descend. All right, now this is a response, actually for the second example. This is from the AND search. And so you see we have a data object that comes back in our response. And inside the data object, which is an array, one object in the array per record that's returned. And then you have a field data object that's going to be returned as part of that object. That's where we have, those are the 4 fields that are on that particular layout. So we get description, part number, price, and the product ID. And then there's some information about the record where we have its modification ID, would see any portal data if there was portal on this layout, as well as the record ID of that particular record. And then it would just repeat up to our limit that we set in the request. In this case, we got 2 responses back.
Hi.
Yeah.
My name's Thomas. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Good. And this right here, is there any metadata that I can get? For example, maybe a self pointer or something like that to the record.
Let me go to the next slide, and I'd like to answer your question. So, like I said, this here is the data, and then there's also a data info that comes back when you didn't have enough room on the slide unless you wanted me to do it in 4-point font. So
okay.
I didn't. As a man of a certain age, I'm sensitive to people that can't see very well, so I like to do stuff. All right, so you get your data info, which tells you about the database, the total number of records, tells you what table it pulled the information from, but then you also see it says the found count as well as the return count. And so that's where you would check there to see, did I get all of the records that I should be getting? Do I need to make another Execute FileMaker Data API request to get those remaining records? So you would get both of those pieces of information there. And I just have one more example. I didn't actually show the response because it's boring. But I just wanted to point out this is a read request using a date range. So all of those operators that we're used to using in FileMaker finds are going to work when we get to Execute FileMaker Data API. So this one here, we're just searching on the birth date field where we've got a range of months for any day in 1977. So if you fall into that category, you're as old as Star Wars. So congratulations.
Dates are always with multi-dated here.
US.
In the US.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it would be whatever your date format is
Okay.
for your.
JSON, it's always.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's because we're using within FileMaker, it's whatever your normal date format would be. All right. So enough about reads. Let's go on to creating. So we have the record ID, and this is the unique ID of the record. This is not your serial number or your UUID that you would create in your table. This would be the FileMaker record ID that is created internally and it's the same result when you use the get record ID function. This is the value that's going to return. There's a field data object, and that's just a JSON object that specifies the fields that you're either going to insert data into during a create or an update, as well as a portal data object that's going to be where you specify the related record data that's either inserted or updated when you make your request.
Portal filters apply when you're getting portal data returned.
That is an excellent question. He was asking about whether portal data comes back if it's filtered.
I think it respects that.
I don't know that it does, but I'd have to get I'll have to research that and get back to you. Because I did not get that far in my demo to get some of the crazy portal stuff.
I believe it does respect the portal sort.
Okay.
So if the portal is sorted, it will respect the sort. But yeah, I would say I don't know about the filter, but it does respect them.
So it does respect the sort, but not.
It may stand to reason.
Okay. Now, there's also a couple optional request keys that you can use. One is mod ID. We saw it coming back as a response, but you can also use it in your request. And what that does is during an update action, if the mod ID that you say the record has does not match its actual mod ID, your request will fail. And so this would be a way to prevent multiple sources hitting the same record. If somebody's updated it, you didn't realize it was updated, that kind of thing. I've never had to use it, but just wanted to point out that it was there. Yeah.
Is there a way to, similar to like a SQL statement, like select certain fields to only return those certain fields, your JSON request?
Yes, that would be by your setup of the layout. So if you don't want a field,
Don't run the layout.
you just take it off the layout, or you would add it to the layout if you need to make a change. Yes. There's also a couple of options. This is a options object with two name value pairs inside of it. The first one is entry mode, and this is the setting that you're going to use to either follow or ignore the validation option, allow user to override during data entry when you're writing data. And that would be found right here on the validation tab of your options for the field. So depending on that checkbox is checked or not, if the user has the value of user will follow the setting. But if you use the value of script, it's going to follow whatever the script behavior and allow that to occur.
So is that something that you need to be aware of if you're doing the duplicate and you have to say override the verification so that it can create its own unique ID?
Yes, you do need to pay attention to that during duplicate with a disclaimer, which I'll get to.
That is no effect if the box is unchecked on second allowing user to override.
Correct. Yeah. If you have the user value, it's going to follow the user permissions. If you use script as the value, it's going to follow whatever the normal behavior is if you were either writing or updating a record using a script. And then the same thing here, there's an option for prohibit mode, and that's for the auto enter option, prohibit modification of value during data entry, which we find there on the auto enter tab. And again, the same values would apply in either user or script as to whether it follows what the user is allowed to do versus what a script is allowed to do. Okay, so here is an example of a create request. So we've got our action, we've got our field data object. In this example, I'm only worried about writing data to 4 fields. That's all I need. Everything else as far as the layout and the version have stayed the same. So I execute that request, and this is the response portion that I get back, again, ignoring the message. But the response tells us that the mod ID is 0, which we would expect because we just created the record. And then it tells me what the record ID of the record is that I just created. Now, if I wanted to update that record, obviously the action would become update. We have our field data for the information that's going to be inserted. And then this time I actually use the record ID as part of my request. So it knows, okay, I'm going to update this record with this ID, with this information. You'll notice that 2 of the fields are the same that I used for the create. One is different. So you don't have to use the same fields during a create as you do during an update. These fields also do not have to be on your layout. The fields that are on your layout are going to come back in the request, but to write, as long as you have the field name spelled correctly and the right permissions, it's going to update that information. And the response when we execute that is just the simple mod ID. It doesn't tell us the record ID because we told it what record, so it's obviously the same record, and it just increments the modification ID so you can see that it's updated.
I'm sorry, hold on. What if there's like a lot of calculated values in there and you want to get them back? You'd have to go query it again.
Correct. Yeah, you would run your create or update, and then you would want to do another read to get that information back.
No, I don't. I wanted you to send it back.
Well, you'll have to talk to Clay then.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
So this is a duplicate. Here we have, that's our action. I went ahead and included the options there just so you guys could see what that object would look like with both following the script behavior for those two, validation and the auto enter. And then we refer to the record ID that we want to duplicate. And then the response that we get back is going to be the same as we would for a create, where it says, okay, you got a mod ID of 0, and the record ID has changed, obviously, because we created a new record, and this is its record ID.
Is there a default to the entry modes? Override or not override?
I believe it defaults to user.
Oh,
yeah. And so this is the last example here of a delete, which is probably one of the simplest ones to set up, where you just make sure your action is correct. You pass it the record ID. I guess layouts is pretty important. You don't want to point at the wrong table and delete the wrong record. But for the sake of the demo, that was the only thing that changed. And so we put that in there. And then what's interesting here is that the response is empty because there's no record to report information on anymore because we just deleted it. So you would get an empty response. All right. So congratulations, you're all older now, so we can talk about the message that comes back. And so this is what an unsuccessful request would look like. You can see there that in the messages, we've got a code number, and the message gives us some detail about the code. And then the response may have information, usually doesn't. It's just empty there. And this is with a reproduct request that I made, and it couldn't find any records. So now, I'm sure none of you have errors that get returned, but I do, so I had to figure out how to handle them. So there's two different ways that you can approach this. Obviously, in the JSON, you could extract the error details from the messages object. Now, hopefully you noticed that there was actually square brackets there around the message. That's because it is an array of objects. It's not just a single message. I've only ever seen one message, but it is technically array, so you have to keep that in mind when you're pulling information out. And each object in the array has that code key with the number, as well as the message description of what that error code means. And if you want to use the JSON get element, pull the error details out of your message, you would use code that looks like this. Just keeping in mind, you do have to have the brackets with your array number to make sure you're getting the proper information out. Now, you may want to consider using a custom function just so you don't have to keep writing that every single time, but that's certainly up to you. Now, what's nice, though, is because this is in a script step, it's going to follow the same behavior of all the other script steps. So if you turn set error capture on, and from this script that it returns an error, if you use get last error, it's going to return the same value that you see in the code key. Get last error detail is going to return the same value that's in the message key. And get last error location is going to return the script name, the step name, and the line number of where the error occurred for you. So you don't actually have to parse out the JSON. If you have an error, you can just do a very quick get last error check, which is very handy. Now, if you want to capture all three values, or depending on how you do your error trapping, you're going to want to make sure you capture them all at once, of course, because as soon as you get your first set variable to get the error, the next script step is going to say, well, there was no error because your previous set variable was successful. And so that's where you want to use a set variable script step and rely on the behavior of the let statement that allows you to declare $, or even double $, variables. And so your calculation looks something like this, where you're setting the error code, but you're using the let statement to get the message and the location as well.
So let's hope there's only one object in the array. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I think this would break.
No, it'll just show the first.
It would probably just show the first. I haven't tested that because, like I said, I've never seen more than a single message. So, again, hopefully Clay has that under control. And
Maybe count the number before continuing this one.
Yeah. So
Now then,
So these are some of the common errors that I encountered as I was in my own development and as I was putting this session together. So this one here, rather than having the two screens, I've got the request that's incorrect on the left, and then the result over here is on the right. So this one here is an unknown action because the API action is a read, but we're used to doing find. So I thought, well, that would be a natural one. So I put that in there, and you'll see over here in our messages, we've got the code of 1708, and the message is unknown action. And it's smart enough to tell us that the unknown action is a find. And the code 1708 is a specific error code that's related to API action. So if you see an 1708, you'll know that it's something to do with your API. This one here is a request for a read. You'll notice that I did not specify the layouts key. It did not like that. What I thought was really cool is that you'll see that we have the code is still that same 1708, but the message is different. It says, well, the reason why you're getting that code this time is because the layout name is required when you're doing a read. What if the layout's missing? That looks like the same layout. I just made it plural from what I have in my demo file. And so when I run that request, I get back the 105 error, which we're all used to seeing, which is a standard FileMaker error code, but it says that the layout is missing. You also have a missing field. Again, I just made the field name plural, and I get the 102 error that we're used to seeing in FileMaker that the field is missing. Already kind of looked at this one where we have the no found records, where I made a request for something I knew was not going to be there, no matter how much I wanted it to be there. There's no real. And so the message comes back with the 401 error that we've seen countless times before. Here, invalid sort order, but this one was a little interesting in the error that it came back is that we've got, a request. We're doing the same search that we've been doing in all the other examples, but I just made up a sort order name. But the result that came back was the code 108, that the value list is missing, which after I stopped to think about it a second, I thought, well, that makes sense because ascend and descend are the two values in the value list for sort order, and I picked a value that didn't belong in that list. You can also have an invalid field. And this is one where I'm trying to specify a field when I'm doing a create to insert the list price, which is actually cost, I believe. So that doesn't exist. I get the same 102 error code that the field is missing. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell me what field is missing, but it at least tells me, the details as to why it failed. There's an invalid record ID. This is here for an update, and we get the 101 error that the record is missing.
Is it safe to assume that since you don't get multiple responses in the message, whatever error it occurs first, it reports back to, and then if you correct that one, it would trip on the next one until it makes its way successfully through?
That would be that is how that's been my experience. Because there was one when I forget what error I was testing, and I was trying to detect the record ID, but I had the field wrong or something like that. And so it gave me that error first before it gave me the one I was expecting. So it seems like it's going to go in order. I don't know what that order is. Again, talk to Clay. He'll be able to tell you how it evaluates. But
So in another relation, I use, actually when I define like the description, I use the get field name to get the name. So if I change the field name, this will not break.
Yes, I actually tweet that out at the end, but you're correct. Yeah, because we're all doing this all in text, you do need to be wary of changing fields or table names for anything that you're using here. And I have a brief or an example, but the way that I handle. So this one here was interesting. This is a duplicate request. I've switched my context from the product table over to the item table, which are those related line items on the order. I have my options are set the same to follow script behavior. I know the record ID is valid, but when I ran it, this was the result that I got. It says user canceled action. I'm like, the user didn't cancel the action. I wanted you to duplicate this. What's going on? And what I determined is that in the items table, I was using the auto enter get UUID calculation for my primary key of my table. As soon as I switched it from that to a regular serial number as my primary key, it started to work. So just be aware that when you encounter this, especially when you're doing a duplicate, make sure that you're not using like UUIDs for your primary keys in the table. So just be aware of that. All right, so a few more demos. I think, how are we doing on time?
I'm sorry, I didn't see any 405 errors or anything like that. So,
well,
like access privileges.
Actually, I have an example here.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the reason why I forgot about this one earlier is because I just added this to my demo last night. So, because I realized I didn't have anything. So this here is an example because I wanted to show you what was going on rather than just throw it up on the screen of what if the user has read-only privileges and you try to run a create or an update. So, we're back here and you'll notice that we're able to create new records and delete. I'm going to go up to the script, switch over to log in as that read-only user. And so that I come down here and run the script that's set up for that. And I run the script, you'll see everything looks good, where we're just creating a record in our product table. But then when I switch over to the tab here that shows me the result, you'll see that it actually gives me a code 200 that record access is denied. So if the user has privileges to create records, script step is going to respect that. If the user doesn't, it's not going to be a workaround for that user to be able to create records in your system if they get a hold of that script step in the wrong way.
Be like a breach.
Yeah.
But the 200 doesn't make sense to me. The 405, right?
100 is success.
Right.
No, that's an HTTP status.
That's HTTP.
Oh.
This is the FileMaker error code.
That's a FileMaker.
That's a FileMaker error code, yes. Yeah, all the codes that were coming back are in the, if you look at the list of FileMaker error codes, they're going to correspond to that. So I try to stay away from web stuff, so I wasn't putting the 405 together. So I'm sorry about that.
I'm sorry about that. It's my fault.
All right, so this here is one of the other instances where I've used Execute FileMaker Data API and actually have stringed a couple of successive calls together just to navigate through my relationships. Because sometimes, depending on the nature of the relationship, go to related records doesn't quite do what you want. So you want to get a list of records in this table, switch context, and search for those values in this table. And so that's what I'm doing here. So it starts, we're here with a list of products. And what I wanted to do is say, okay, if I select a product, I want to see every order that this product appeared on, because maybe we need to do a recall or we want to contact the customer to find out how it's performing for them. And so we want to get this list back in JSON so that we can pass it off to another system.
Did you really create 97 items that would be useful for Coyote?
Actually, I found a list of everything that he ever ordered.
Awesome.
So this is the request where we've got the product ID that we're using as searching in the foreign key of the item table. And just so that I didn't have to go back and forth to script debugger, I just pulled it up here in these windows for us. And so we run that request. This is the response.data object that would come back from our read. You'll notice that we've got our three objects for the records. and then we have the field data, and the field data is what I want. So I can't take this and send it directly to my next Execute FileMaker Data API request. So what I've done is I'm going to use the while function to do a conversion for me. So we've got this while calculation where we're initializing some variables, figuring out how many items are in my array, set my exit condition, and then I come down and I pull out my field data object from that item. Now I have to convert the name because I'm going from a foreign key name to a primary key name when I go to search in the order table. And then I take that object and put it back into a separate array. And so when I run that and allow it to proceed, I will end up with an array that looks like this. Just a sec. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is what the field data object is going to look like, where I've taken all of that out and I made sure that my field name is correct and I've got just the pieces of information that I want to use in my query. Then I can insert that directly into my request for my next Execute FileMaker Data API call. And so when I run that, now I have my response back, which again looks the same, where we've got our field data, mod ID, portal data, record IDs. But because of what I want to pass to the next system, I only need to worry about the address information. I go ahead and use another while calculation to quickly transform that. Again, figuring out how many items are in the array, and then going ahead and reassembling that as a JSON object. And then once that is completed, I'll end up with an object that looks like this, with just objects in my array of the shipping values.
So in this case, you specified 3 individual keys and then looked for the items. But what if one of those triggered an error? Would it return the other 2? Or would you be cut off at the first instance of an error and only return an error?
That is, he was asking if one of them failed, what would happen? I'm not certain what would happen if it encountered an error, because I'm looking for related data, and I'm just going to request that because I'm assembling the find the same way, it would just turn. I believe it would just turn the 2 items. It's like if you would make a general find for a bunch of criteria, it's only going to return what's going to match. Now, obviously, if I made a mistake when I was converting from the array of my response from the first API call to the second Execute FileMaker Data API script step, it would give me the error because I've done something with the formatting. That's where, depending on how you name your fields, you wouldn't have to do all of the conversion stuff that I do, but I have a very strict naming convention that a primary key has a double underscore, and foreign key has a single underscore with an F at the end. So I had to convert the name to make sure that the field I'm searching on actually existed when I made my second Execute FileMaker Data API request. So as long as that's all following, you should have success. It would just return, like if you had like a phantom record because the order got deleted, but somehow a line item got stuck in there, I think it would just say, well, as long as I returned some records, it wouldn't tell you that, hey, I missed one. It would just give you the results.
It's an OR find, isn't it? Because it's an OR find, it will find 2 and just not the other one.
Yes.
I guess that therein lies my question. If in the event that one of them fails, how would you be notified? If you were to try to assemble a request for multiple pieces of data, how would you find out if one thing failed? If the other things were
ask for 3 and get 2.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, but that's I didn't ask. I mean, I asked for 3. If you could probably look at in the data info, it would tell you, because you would be able to count the number of requests that you were making, and you could error trap for that. I guess for the sake of the demo, that's not something that I worry about, because I knew that I didn't have any orphan records. So I knew if I found the line items, it's going to find me the orders that those line items are on. So that would probably be the way that you would need to do it, is you would go in, look at that in that data info object, see.
What I was wondering is whether or not, because you had the return message, whether or not then the array might be used. Maybe multiple return messages might be returned if there was an error returned or something else.
But is it an error that couldn't find something. It's not
Well,
an error.
that's my question. Whatever the error might be, if one of the things you're looking for out of multiple things returns some kind of error, and the other things are returned, but that one thing isn't, is that returned in the array of messages as a return?
But I don't think so because it's not an error.
Yeah, it's
not
not
an error.
It's still returned a
Still
found
returned.
set. Yeah.
Even nothing is still not an error. You just couldn't find it.
Yeah, you just couldn't find it. Yeah. So the last example I have is
Nothing to give it word one.
kind of a combination where I'm starting in the same point where I'm getting the same making the same request because I want to look up the products, getting the same response, and of course again I have to convert the data. I mean, I guess I wouldn't have had to convert the data, but for the sake of the demo, I did. Just I thought it looked cool because I'm really proud of this stuff. Anytime I can use a wow function, I'm very proud. And so we convert it to get our array of order items or the order IDs that this product appeared as line items for these orders. But then what I've done is instead of running another Execute FileMaker Data API script step is, in this case, I wanted to show the records to the user immediately. So just switching over to the script now, here we go into an order table, doing similar stuff to what I did in the WoW, but now it's just in a script where I'm counting the number of objects that are in my array, entering find mode, and then I just drop into find mode and go into a loop. Here, set my index for that iteration of the loop, pull out the array number that I want to grab, get the object that corresponds to that array number, and then go ahead and get that ID out, and I use that as my find criteria for that particular request. You can see right there. And then I can set my exit condition to make sure I'm not searching for more objects than what I have, and then creating a new request if I need to loop back around. And so then once I've done that, perform the find, and then it will hopefully be successful. Then I can switch back to my order layout. And so now I have just those three orders where that product appears, and now the sales person can make follow-up phone calls or whatever they need to do.
So you just recode it, you go to reading reports.
Pretty much, yeah. Because like I said, there's been times where go to related record doesn't seem like it's performed as well, or because I don't actually have a direct path because of the relationships. Like I have the right foreign key, but I don't have the relationship back to the table that I'm searching on, so I can get information here, switch contexts completely in my graph, and then pull up the same information that I want. So, and it's not an example, it's not for everybody, but in my use cases, that's what I need.
How's it perform when you're doing the find and query? How do you perform on sorting out or things that are not indexed?
It performs pretty much the same way you would expect a normal find.
You still have that weight.
We still have the weight. Like I said, I don't know if I specifically mentioned this, but this is a tool in the toolbox, but it's not the magic bullet that's going to solve all of your problems. I just had run across a couple of use cases where I thought, I think this is going to be a good way to do it, and so that's the path that I started down. So just a few final thoughts. Just a few things about my own personal preferences. You can make of it as what you will. For building layouts, I like to maintain API-specific layouts. You don't have to, but by keeping the layout specific, you don't have to worry about, well, if I change the data entry layout to add the new field that this person needs, is it going to change my result that comes back when I use the Execute FileMaker Data API script step? And also, typically, I'll use like a prefix in front of it so I know exactly what it's for. And I also try to avoid special characters and even spaces when I'm naming those layouts, even if it violates my own naming convention. Because these layouts, because we're built using the same architecture, we could use them if we ever wanted to use the Claris FileMaker Data API web service if the file is ever hosted. And because the layout name usually goes in your path, you have to worry about URL encoding if you've got special characters in your layouts. So if you just avoid them, then you don't have to worry about that. when using the script step, my preference is I like to use variables for both the request and the target. You can, as I mentioned before, in the request, it's going to open up the calculation editor so you can do everything there. I find it's a little bit easier to debug if I'm using set variable. Get my calculation, I can look and make sure that is this the request I want to send when I'm using script debugger before I actually continue the script and actually run the script step. But again, that's a me thing. And I do the same thing for the target just so that I can kind of preview the data before I start putting stuff into fields and making changes. Question came up earlier, but you may want to consider insulating yourself from, the requests from layout or field name changes. I call it getting a case of the clevers, because it's like you name a field and then you add some other fields and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that name makes no sense. So I got to change it to fall in line with the stuff that you added, and then you break a bunch of stuff. Now, the method that I use is there's a name ID function that Fabrice Nordman with One More Thing has developed a number of years ago that I continue to use that helps with that. And what that does is that if you give the function the name of the object, whether it's a layout or a field, it'll give you its FileMaker ID number, and then you could refer to the FileMaker, and when you pass it the ID number, it returns you the name of the object. So that way, as long as you identify what the number is when you first set it up, it doesn't matter what the name changes to, this function will give you the name when you need to insert it into your calculation to create your request. So I'm sure there are other custom functions out there that people have developed. You may have even developed your own. This just happens to be the one that I use. As far as additional resources, mentioned both of these already. My primary resources were, again, the Claris FileMaker Data API guide, which is the web service one, but there's a lot of information that's going to apply because, again, same underlying technology. And then you have the Claris FileMaker Pro help specific to this particular script step. And it's just a little shameless self-promotion. One of the community lives that was here in February unlocked the Execute FileMaker Data API script step. I happened to be the guest that day and talked a little bit about what we've already covered today, but if you need a refresher, that's available as well. There's also a number of partner resources. There's a lot of blog posts that are available by many, many developers. I didn't want to risk offending anybody by leaving somebody off the list, so I didn't list them here. But if you Google search or go to the FileMaker community and search there, you'll be able to pull up quite a few resources there if you need more details. And then if you're interested in that name ID function, you can find it on Brian Dunning's custom function website. There may be other places where you can get that as well. That's all I have. I think we're about at time. I know we fielded a few questions during, but are there any follow-up questions?
Or if I want to write any records, insert any records, do we do that in a single script step, or do we just call a script step?
Because it's set up as an array, I believe if you have an array of items, it will insert multiples.
Okay.
Let me verify that and get back to you. But I believe that's how it works. It's set up in an array of objects.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, I found it to be a little bit slower than just doing a regular insert record using the API.
Okay.
To go back to what you briefly mentioned in the middle of the talk, it seemed like a possible stumbling block. You were saying in the duplicate, you were using it to duplicate, but you were using primary keys as your table relationship. It would fail, and you needed to do a key on different records.
Well, it's the type of primary key that you use. Okay. If you use like a serial number for like the auto enter option serial number that FileMaker gives us, you're not going to have any problems with the duplicate. Where I ran into problems is if I had used the auto enter calculation and was calculating a UUID as my primary key, is that it would not create a new primary key and it saw that as a duplicate.
So if you're using get UUID number, for example, that would probably break.
That would probably break. But if you're using serial number, you're fine when you're doing a duplicate.
Wouldn't that have to do with whether you're overwriting during the auto enter? It doesn't overwrite, then you get a duplicate key, but if it overwrites, it'll create it.
probably. That's one thing I failed to check. Thanks for mentioning that, Ron. I don't know if you heard, but if you have it to where it'll overwrite, you would probably change the value. But if you're not,
uncheck the box, do that.
Just uncheck the box.
yeah,
Check that box.
yeah.
Is there a way to use the API call on a bound of records instead of performing a query? Like I could just say, I'm on these 10 records, give it to me as to
Require
the query.
It's going to require the query because, like I said, you're actually starting a completely new. It like treats it as a separate session, so it's going to call out like it doesn't have any context. So you would need to set that, and even though you're already looking at the record, like in the examples that I used, it was pretty easy because I wanted to like duplicate the record I was already on. So all I had to do was pass it a single primary key, and it would find it.
I was thinking about it from a reporting standpoint that if I already isolated this data set, the users that got this 100 record, and all I need is JSON so that I can reformat it using the tool that does a pretty job with it. Instead of having to grab the primary keys of this and creating the query to then find another place to get the JSON, I would be nice if it just said, here's a found set, give me JSON. This would happen through one.
Yeah, I mean,
Monkey Bread software has something like that. Do the record ID, like get record ID for those 100. So you skip the query. Yeah, you could
just query.
Yeah.
You still get. Yeah, I mean, there are ways where you could get, but I think there's a new function now that's what lists to JSON. So if you run a custom function that gets you the list of something you're using your found set, quickly convert that to JSON and insert it into your query portion. And all you would need to add is search on display.
Or is that something that's going to be
built in?
Yeah,
There is a custom function. I think I'm using one. I'm not sure where I got it from. Brian Dunning. There's
a function that I do this like list, and I just tell it I want this field start at record 1, and it gives me all of the values in that field for the entire.
Or Monkey Bread software plugin has a function to get the found set in a JSON.
A record looking. You have a record if by another user.
Yeah,
that's gonna behave the same as.
If a record's locked, it's going to behave the same as
Any detail about who's using the record?
I honestly don't know because since all of my testing was on a standalone copy, I never had tried to lock one of my records that I was trying to update. So
I'll work with those transaction script steps. If you start a transaction, then you do a bunch of operations and that.
I'm going to guess not because again, it's spinning up that other separate context and session, so that I don't know that it would respect the transactional nature of the script. We are at time. Want to be respectful. Thanks for hanging out. We went a few minutes over, so thank you very much.